Hey guys! So apparently I am just completely out of sorts today. I didn't put up my notice that I was going to do a reading today. I didn't put up the graphic for it. I don't know what happened. It's been a week. We're almost to Christmas and I don't even know what day it is half the time at this point. I'm just rushing to get everything done. And so I apologize for those of you who were wondering why I didn't put a notice up this week. That was my bad. So we are still doing our reading. Yes, I don't want to skip it. We are getting to some fun chapters. And I believe we are on, oh, did I lose my bookmark? Nope, I didn't. It's just buried. We are doing chapter 28 and 29 today. And these are going to be some very interesting chapters. I hope you guys are following along. Grab your books and let's get ready to read. All right, chapter 28. Night had fully bloomed by the time they pulled up to a Northtown club thrumming with electronica music. A line had formed near the entrance, scantily clad patrons queuing up to await entry, mostly female, Sage noted, as they pulled up to the back of the building, where a large parking lot, half filled with cars, gave access to another private entrance. A few people hung around the back door to the club, but not as many as she'd seen up front. Vampires running a nightclub? Sage groaned at the cliche. We all have to fit into society. Gray jumped in before she could say something she might regret. Remember, everyone has to earn their keep. Sage looked around, inspecting the parking lot, trying to determine who among the people milling around the back door were human and who weren't. But isn't it a little too... It is what it is, Gray shrugged. We don't police people's daily lives. Remember that. Our job is to keep the magic in check. Be on your best behavior. We're on their turf. Got it, she smirked. I solemnly swear that... No, I mean it, Sage. You're going to see them, warts and all. Keep your mouth shut. We're here for information only. I don't need you to pick a fight over any skewed morality. The strain in his tone said much more than his words. They were crossing into enemy territory. Much as she wanted to be cute and snarky with Gray, it was time to get her head in the game. Vampires were the ones who had turned her mom dark. They were the reason that she'd been awakened. Sage crossed herself and held up a 3-finger salute. Scout's honor. Damn newbie. Gray mumbled under his breath, shaking his head as he started towards the edge of the parking lot. Not going through the back entrance? She noted. Sage tried to look casual while keeping her eyes sharp as she followed Gray. A couple were making out, pressing themselves against the body of an old pickup truck. 2 girls, who looked like they belonged in an 80s movies with giant hair and eye-assaulting neon-colored leggings, were having a smoke under a set of stairs that led up to a private entrance on the 2nd floor. A group of guys were arguing a few cars over. Words like territory and rules stuck in her ears. She realized quickly that most, if not all, the people out in the back parking lot were vampires. A cold dread settled over her. She sought out the mark on her wrist, fingers rubbing it like a worry stone. The moment she realized what she was doing, she noticed the girls at the back stairs watching her. They recognized her for what she was. Gray rounded the corner and came out to the front of the building. At least the majority of people there were human. That thought comforted her until Gray walked up to a large bald man with muscles that had muscles of their own. The bouncer was definitely not human. I need to talk to the boss. Gray spoke with confidence that made her wonder how well he knew the vampires. He had a connection with Zach, so it could stand to reason that he'd have a working relationship with more of the other vampires too. Ava had singled him out specifically for this mission. When the bouncer didn't immediately let them inside, Gray held up his wrist, showing his mark. Without prompting, Sage showed hers as well. A low grumble rolled up the bouncer's chest, audible even over the thrum of music leaking from the doors. He reached for his walkie-talkie at his waist and called into a small radio. Tara's incoming. 2 of them. Keep up the good work. Gray pushed past the behemoth, giving him a pat on the shoulder as he entered the club. Sage was his shadow, not wanting to be separate at all inside the lion's den. Instinct said run, but Gray continued on into the dark. The temperature dropped noticeably as they passed through a curtained doorway and stepped down into the main floor. Lights and lasers assaulted her nearly as much as the volume of the music, distractions that would make it easy to be ambushed. She'd been in clubs many times and expected the loud music, the overwhelming stench of cheap perfume and sweaty bodies rubbing up against each other, but seeing vampires actively feeding right out in the open was a sight she could never have prepared herself to witness. Sage wanted to say something, but Gray had already warned her. Books and movies had romanticized the idea of being fed on by a vampire. They made it seem sexy and passionate, but as they waded through the throng of people, Sage could see pained expressions on some of the victims' faces. Music overpowered most of the other noises, but she could almost feel their moans reaching out to her, and they were definitely not the pleasurable sort. They won't remember a thing, Gray leaned in and whispered in her ear. They'll live, right? Sage asked, hoping the answer was yes. Not our territory, not our issue. Unless someone screws up and makes it our issue, he replied without a hint of emotion. Now wipe the disgusted look off your face before we piss off our host. Devon had been right. She wasn't ready for this. Sage gritted her teeth and set her jaw as she fought for control over the disgust in her eyes. Taking a deep breath helped. Focusing on air, in and out, occupied her mind as she continued to follow Gray. He snaked around the dance floor, past the center bar, and headed towards a roped-off VIP section. Did I skip a page? No? Okay. You two finally found each other, a familiar voice called out from behind her. The last voice she wanted to hear. It sounded far from friendly, though he took great steps to appear so. Zach came into view, his lips stretched wide enough to make sure Sage saw his fangs. Determined to ignore him, she continued to keep pace with Gray. Zach was suddenly at her side. Of all the places I'd expect to see you, this never made the list. Enjoying the show? She refused to acknowledge his obvious attempt to get under her skin. Okay, you got to give me a second. My cat is literally doing everything he can to be an annoyance right now, so I'm going to let him out of the room real quick. Go on. Go on. Okay, sorry about that. If I don't, he'll get even worse over time, so just let it be what it is. All right, where did we leave off? Here we go. Of all the places I'd expect to see you, this never made the list. Enjoying the show? She refused to acknowledge his obvious attempt to get under her skin. You won't find welcome here if that's what you think, Zach said a little too loudly. Gray stopped so suddenly that Sage ran into him as he turned around to face the vampire. We're under orders, welcome or not. Either escort us upstairs or go find yourself something to snack on. Zach made a show of wiping his mouth. How quickly we turn on our friends. No respect. No thanks. He took the lead towards the velvet ropes. Another bouncer was standing guard, less intimidating than the one outside, but only by a fraction. Zach mouthed the words, Para, and the bouncer grimaced but opened the velvet rope all the same, allowing Sage and Gray to pass. Zach stayed behind. Nice knowing you both. Ignore him, Gray said. Oh, was he talking? Sage replied with a smirk. Halfway up to the VIP section, a door opened on the top landing. Sage recognized the woman peeking her head out as one of the Twisted Sisters who'd been smoking out the back door when they came through. She held the door open, but didn't greet Sage with any warmth. The office behind the door was surprisingly large, with its own back door exit. Sage made a quick mental note of the windows and doors, as well as the vampires sitting around in the cozy room, hoping to avoid a fight, but still wanting to escape all the same. Gray paid particular interest in the two women who had taken their place at a very official-looking desk. Blondie, with the eye-assaulting green leggings, had the chair. To her left, perched on the corner of the desk, sat an equally 80s-inspired lady. Her face was concealed by a black morning cap with matching lace trim hanging over her eyes. Who's the new leadership here? Gray opened the meeting by speaking to the two women, but nodded casually towards two more gentlemen standing like bodyguards near the back door. Why, you here to take us out as well? Blondie with the neon green leggings spoke first. Her partner scowled but said nothing. I'm here for fact-finding. A truce? Gray assured them. Blondie hissed at the word truce, her glare darkening. We believe someone's playing both sides against the middle, Gray continued, despite the obvious aggression. Now, I don't know about you, but I hate games, and being played is only causing both of us trouble. Fangs on display, Blondie did not appear to be in a talking mood. You're the one in trouble now, Tara. Hey, we've both taken heavy losses. Do you really think threats are the right response here? Gray was probably the worst choice for diplomat. His words might have been well-intentioned, but his natural arrogance gave them a haughty edge that Blondie clearly picked up on. You think we're just going to bow and scrape before you? When the terrorists speak, all must listen. You talk of losses. You have no idea what true loss is. Blondie's partner nodded emphatically. Terrorists have lorded over us for too long, thinking you're better than us. And at the end of the day, you all bleed just like anyone else. And look how you come crawling when someone dares to challenge you. Do you see me on my knees? Gray shot back at them. Sage choked on her breath. Oh, wrong choice of words. He's falling right into their trap. If I wanted you on your knees, you'd be there, Blondie cackled. And if A.S.S.E.T wanted you dead, we'd have finished this job that you claim we started. Gray stood strong, crossing his arms at his chest, locking eyes with Blondie, daring her to keep taunting him. The men standing guard at the door, ready for a fight. Their muscles tensed, and they kept their eyes trained on Gray and Sage as if waiting for the word. Death was coming. Sage could feel it in her bones. The meeting was not going to end in words. It would end in blood. Her heart kicked into overdrive, and she realized the odds were stacked against them. She might be able to hold her own against one, but there were three more to deal with. Gray acted like a badass, but how good was he? Could he take on three of them? There had to be another way. Something to calm the aggression and get them to listen, but what? She knew nothing of these people or what they cared about. No, she did know what they loved. Blood. Blondie eyed her with a hunger that screamed predator. Silence passed as Sage's heart thundered loudly. Surely the vampires could hear it. They were probably counting the beats, just imagining the blood flowing through her veins. Zack had called her an acquired taste. More out of reflex than intention, she nudged Gray, hoping he would bow out gracefully before they became the main course of the evening. Gray spoke again, this time taking a lighter approach. I'm not here to exact any revenge or punishment on behalf of A.S.S.E.T. We're here for peace. I might not know loss, but she does. He turned his gaze to Sage. Her mother was one of the Darklings sent in the attack. She's afraid and alone in this world, and just wants to know how it all happened. Oh, poor little baby. Blondie wasn't buying his change of tactic. Too bad. It had been a far nicer approach than he'd used steamrolling them. If Mama hadn't been sticking her nose in places she shouldn't belong, then this little girl would never know her place in the world. Blondie's laugh echoed through the room, with all her compatriots joining in on the joke. So much for appealing to your good nature, Sage groaned. You clearly have none. Baby can speak. Adorable. Blondie's mouth twisted evilly into a lopsided grin. I'm gonna venture a guess here. You're new to your position, Gray said, drawing attention back to him. Word is, the vampire covens had a major shakeup recently. Lost a lot of old blood. Blondie's expression sharpened. You Terras would know all about that, wouldn't you? It is our job, Gray replied. To wipe out entire covens in the blink of an eye, you call us killers. Have you looked in the mirror lately? Blondie threw her words like daggers. How could we wipe out an entire coven? Gray parried her angry accusation with practiced efficiency. By what means was your clan harmed? Blondie smirked. Keep fishing, honey. I told you, we're after information. Gray's nostrils flared angrily. Whoever's causing the rift, they're not just going after your people. But my people are the ones paying the price, Blondie snapped at him. And until we can get to the bottom of things, this kind of crap's going to continue to happen. Gray responded again with an equal amount of annoyance. More vampires dead. Maybe. Or perhaps the reign of the terror will come to an end. It is, after all, your race, lording over all the others, that started this fight in the first place. The gods' perfect creation sent to bring order to the chaotic magic ruining precious Mother Earth. Her voice dripped with sarcasm. Funny to hear that come from someone who's stolen their magic. Gray threw a dirty look at the cocky vampire. At least I have some, Blondie retorted, not missing a beat. You're kind of the worst kind of immortal. Useless without magic. But you can bleed. The men who'd been standing guard at the door looked at each other, and then to Blondie. She nodded slightly, and they took that as their cue to move in. Gray unsheathed a large blade from his waist and moved like lightning to block. He connected with one target, but the other man continued towards Sage. She pulled out a small blade from her belt and folded it back against her wrist. More beast than man, the male vampire moved towards her with a cocky stride, certain of his next meal. Where he should have had two fangs, there was only one, and a gaping hole left in the other's place. One fang was plenty enough, though, and by the looks of it, sharp as a nail. The look he gave her nearly froze her in place. Snaggletooth he might be, but still predatory in every sense of the word. As he barreled down on her, she remembered Devon's warnings. This wasn't training. It was no time to be the victim. As soon as he was in range, she whipped her arm around in a frantic swipe. The edge of her blade made contact with his shirt, but it didn't stop his momentum. She swiped her arm again with the knife, but he caught her wrist with a backhand that knocked the blade from her grip. It flew into the air, but she never saw it land. Snaggletooth was on her before the clatter of fallen steel sounded. Arms like vice grips crushed the wind from her body. It happened so fast that her mind couldn't comprehend what was going on. He leaned down, his cold breath ghosting across her neck, a promise of what was to come. Sage struggled, squirming, trying to inch away from his teeth. She sent her knee up to meet his groin. He hissed and threw his head forward, colliding with hers. Pain kept her riveted to the moment. Her ears rang and her skull ached as if it were splitting in two. She gave in and stopped struggling, if she gave in and stopped struggling, it would be game over. She had to keep fighting as long as there was breath in her lungs. His body was an immovable wall. His arms had her pinned to her sides, and he held her weight entirely under his control. She had no moves. Devon's words whispered again in her mind. Use what you have. She had nothing. No weapons, no fists. She squirmed with her legs and tried again to find the sweet spot between his legs, but he had guarded himself this time. If nothing else, her struggling amused him, so that's why he hadn't finished the job. What else could she do? Vibrations from his mocking laughter reverberated against her cheek, pressed against his chest. She turned her head and bit down into his peck as hard as she could. Snaggletooth yowled and punished her with another smash of his wrecking ball of a head into hers. Unconsciousness took her for a few precious moments. Sage awoke to a sharp pain like 100 needles piercing her flesh. Vaguely aware of the mouth clamped on her neck and suckling, she had lost. And then suddenly, the body above her went slack. The weight of him was still pinning her to the ground, but the pressure of his mouth had gone. Sage tried to turn her head and see what was happening, but it was no use. Screams erupted in the room. Blood splattered across her face, but she couldn't see from where or who had caused it. Sounds of a fight raging around her continued to echo. Fear gripped her as tightly as the man crushing her body into the floor. Her heart would have been racing, but weak as she was from loss of blood, it barely registered a beat. Then, as if he'd grown wings, or suddenly been filled with gas, her attacker floated off of her. Immediately, she rolled away and pushed herself to her knees. "We need to get out of here, now," Gray shouted. He was covered from head to toe in blood, and bits of something she'd rather not recognize or want to. "Can you run?" Sage tried to nod, but heavy. Her head swayed more than moved under her will. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Only the knowledge of how dead she would be if if she stayed, gave her strength enough to put one foot in front of the other and stumble after Gray. He bolted the door leading to the club and turned towards the back staircase door. Pulling her along, they made their way down the stairs and into the parking lot. Sage clung to Gray as if he could keep her from passing out again. When they made it to his bike, they found Zach sitting on it. "Nice ride." He always seemed to have that cocky smirk on his face. His eyes were lit with something like excitement as he looked towards Sage. "Someone's been naughty." "Off the bike," Gray warned. Zach rose to his feet. "Had you come to me asking nicely, I would have given you all the information you needed." "You could have offered information willingly, too," Gray replied. Sage vaguely remembered Devin asking, or maybe ordering Zach to find out information, and the bastard had run cowering from his gem. If she'd had the strength or control over her body, she might have brought that fact up. As it was, she was barely keeping herself upright, and if someone didn't give her a place to sit soon, she would take that final rest right there on the asphalt. "That's something you're kind of very bad at, asking nicely," Zach teased. "Might do to remember that next time." "Are we done with the life lessons?" Gray asked. Sage was sure that he was stalling for time, and the rest of the coven would come down on them at any second. She tugged at Gray's jacket, urgently, and the strength it took nearly toppled her over. Zach's eyes followed her frightened motion, and then sank lower from her face to the open wound at her neck. "Yep, you better move quickly." He retreated from the bike and let Gray mount it. Against her moaning protest, it was Zach who helped Sage climb on the back and ordered her to hold tight. "Don't let go. Don't pass out." Sage nodded stupidly, already halfway between worlds, but clung to Gray's body as ordered. Zach closed in once more as Gray brought the bike to life, and with a mighty roar of the engine, "I'll give you this one for free," he whispered in Sage's ear. "The one who attacked my people wore the mark of a Terra, but that was a false glamour, one made of ink and not magic." He ran a finger through the bloody wound at her neck and licked it clean, smiling as Gray tore off out of the parking lot. Chapter 29. Fading in and out of consciousness, Sage clung tightly to Gray as he sped through the streets. Minutes might as well have been hours. Time warped and twisted, much as the bike weaving through the blur of neon and moonlight. Sage fought to keep her grip through the tempting call of sleep. She replayed the moments those snaggle teeth had sunk into her neck. Like serrated daggers, they ripped her flesh open, and the pain was raw and angry. She'd never forget that feeling as long as she lived, though that might not be much longer. Streetlights turned fluorescent as stars. Streetlights turned fluorescent as stars transformed into ceiling tiles. She moved, but not of her own accord. Someone had pulled her away from the death grip that she'd had on Gray. When and how were questions she couldn't get her mouth to form, or find the breath to push the words past her lips. She understood one thing, as weakness forced her to accept the warmth and strength cradling her. She was safe now. "I told you to protect her," Devin shouted, his booming voice unmistakably angry, but not the kind of anger she was used to hearing from him. When he shouted at her, it was meant to motivate, to force her to get up and fight. His tone now struck hard like a punch to the gut. True anger. Gray had to be his target, but he didn't deserve it. Asshole that he was, Gray was the reason she was still living. Sage wanted to answer in his defense, but the words refused to come out. Her vision faded. Halos reached out from the lights above, blurring the rest of the world so that all she could see was the bright glow. What she really wanted, desperately, was to allow herself to fall into the darkness. Sleep, rest, time to heal. It's all she needed, just a little time in the darkness, and then she could return. She made that promise as her eyes began to shut, and then pain, fresh and raw as teeth that had shredded her skin, shocked them open again. "Stay with us," a desperate voice shouted. Both Devin and Gray were pleading with her to stay awake. "No sleeping, okay? Stay awake. Stay here for me." Hands grasped at her and shook her. A smack landed across her face, sending fresh pain blooming through her cheek. Anger was all that kept Sage clinging to the light. furious at them for waking her. She needed to rest. How could she heal without rest? We need to get her patched up, and get me some of that liquid iron. Devon shouted orders like a general in the field. He packed her neck with something warm and wet. It tingled at first, and then the burning began, like fire dripping into her already angry wounds. She hissed in agony, bringing her vision back into clarity as she came fully awake. Fine lines had etched deeply across Devon's brow. Yeah, it's gonna hurt. But his voice lacked the sympathy to match his worried expression. He forced her mouth open and poured a bitter draught and commanded her to swallow it. If she'd had the strength, she'd have retched from the taste, bitter and coppery, like the essence of pennies. As soon as you can stand, we'll give you something to wash it down. Devon attempted to smile, but it didn't look convincing. She had to look pretty bad, maybe even worse than she felt. She's a tough one. Gray's voice came from outside her field of vision. Newbie here tried to fend him off. You gotta watch those knees of hers, he chuckled. And she's a biter, too. You'd be proud. She had to look pretty bad if Gray was trying his hardest to praise her. She didn't swallow any of his blood, did she? Devon's concern turned to fear as he spoke the words. You'd have to ask her, Gray replied. I was kind of busy. She reached through the fog, clogging up her memory. It had all happened so quickly. She'd bitten down as hard as she could, but it wasn't onto bare skin. Layers of clothing had been between her and the damn vampire. She shook her head, and the movement tugged at the bandages that Devon had just applied. Tape ripped at her hairs just at the root, and she groaned. Everything she did brought a new level of pain. Scrappy little fighter, aren't you? Devon laid the praise on a little thicker than she'd ever heard, a testament to his relief seeing her on the mend. Told you not to go messing with vampires. Her voice failed when she tried to speak. She was awake, but that was mostly due to pain. With the right meds, she'd be happy enough to drift off into unconsciousness. We stirred up the hornet's nest pretty good, white flag or not, Gray said. Devon stroked his chin. I don't understand Ava's motivation in sending you. It's well known that she hates me, Gray sounded on the edge of pure exhaustion. But she also knows I have ties to the Coven, friends in low places. I guess less threatening than the typical A.S.S.E.T agent? And Newbie over here is practically wearing a neon sign advertising her inexperience. It was clear we weren't coming for a fight. You don't waste good men on a fool's errand. Devon didn't sound convinced by Gray's easy explanation. And whether or not you were there to fight, they had already shown their willingness to pick one. I don't know then, Gray sighed. He paced around the room, moving in and out of Sage's field of vision. Ava's not a general like you. Too many years pushing pencils. I bet she hasn't seen action for more than 100 years. Sage took a deep breath and called up whatever remained of her strength. She hated listening on the sidelines when she should be part of the conversation. She rolled onto her side and propped herself on her elbow. Careful now, Gray called out, rushing towards her. She swung her feet off the edge of the table and used the momentum to help lift her to a seated position. Gray was at her side, ready to catch her if she fell, but Sage managed to find balance. I'm not going to go dark, am I? She struggled to push the words past her chapped lips. Devon shook his head. Nah, I don't think so. But you might want to take things slowly. You're as white as a ghost. You've lost quite a bit of blood. He walked away for a moment, disappearing into his office, and when he returned, he had a small box of coconut water in hand. Drink this. It'll help. Ugh, do I have to? That stuff is horrible. She grimaced. Matt had forced her to drink it on many occasions. That and a little B12 will cure what ails you, he'd say. Nature's electrolytes, a perfect drink to help speed you into recovery. Devon twisted the small cap and handed it to her. Why does everything healthy have to taste like crap? She'd almost rather take the bitter medicine again than endure the full bottle of coconut water. Don't blame me if I gag. Don't you dare, Devon threatened her with a look. She took a sip, holding her breath as she swallowed. Wasn't as bad as she remembered, or maybe she was just that thirsty. A sip turned into a chug before she wiped her mouth clean. Her mind suddenly flashed back to Zach, swiping his finger across her bloody neck and whispering in her ear. Why didn't Zach try to kill us? She blurted out with disgust. Gray shrugged. He's an opportunist. Probably didn't serve his needs. But won't his people be in an uproar if they saw him let us go? She asked. Again, Gray shrugged. Not our problem. If they kill him for being a traitor, so be it. If they don't, he'll continue to inform whoever pays his price. Slimy little worm. Sage choked down another gulp and grimaced. We all have our parts to play, Gray said. And when you do report their attack on you, Devon stroked his bare chin, then A.S.S.E.T will be obliged to respond. Vegas may be vampire-free by the end of the week. Gray waggled an eyebrow at the prospect. Sounds a lot like war to me. Someone's orchestrated it, and we're all playing into their game, Devon suggested. Ava might not be a general, but someone out there is using us all as pawns. So you don't think I should report the attack? Gray asked. Devon's brow furrowed, deep in thought. Minutes went by, and he still had no answer. The first thing they'll ask is if I was in danger. Then if I got any information, Gray said. And I'm guessing you didn't? Devon asked. Gray shook his head, but they had gotten something out of that trip. Sage struggled to push away the fog. Her memory was still sketchy, but Zach had said something. He'd whispered it. We did get something. Both pair of eyes were on her the moment she spoke, but the memory hadn't finished playing out. Zach had licked her wound. No, he'd run a finger through her wound. No, it was before he tasted her blood. Glamour, she whispered. It's something we can see through, Gray sighed with annoyance. No, he said glamour of ink. She struggled to remember his exact words. Not magic. So then a disguise? Devon filled in the blanks. Yes, whoever attacked only looked like a Terra. They wore the mark. That's what he said. And the only true identifying mark of a Terra is on your wrist, Devon added. So someone's walking around with a tattoo? They sat in silence again. Sage could almost hear the wheels working as the machinery of their brains went into overdrive. She sipped her drink, gagging as she forced it down. She wasn't quite up to speed just yet, but already gaining strength. She sat up a little straighter. Their kind were supposed to heal quickly, at least that's what she'd been told. She had to have been made of tough stuff to have held up for as long as she had against Snaggletooth's attack. She hadn't seen Gray fight, but he'd taken out 3 vampires all on his own and finished off her 4th. She owed him thanks for that. In lieu of praise, she might give him her trust. That was the crux of it all. Who could she be certain of in this whole new world of violence that she'd been ushered into? Who's trustworthy and who isn't? Sage found herself speaking aloud as if her mind worked out the problem. If we knew the answer to that, our problems would be solved, Devon snorted. Ava? She asked. Has questionable leadership choices lately, Devon answered matter-of-factly, but not condemning her outright. She's been around a good long time, Gray added. But is she someone you trust? Sage asked, hoping for a straight answer. Why? Gray looked at her curiously. One of these days, that man was going to give her a simple yes or no. Clearly, this was not that day. Sage ground her teeth, frustrated at having to qualify everything. You say she got onto you for being too nosy when the weapon came through Vegas. Punished you, right? Sage asked. Made you babysit me? Gray's eyes narrowed, but he didn't respond. Like a confused puppy, he looked at her curiously as if needing more clarification. Talking was hard enough as it was. Why did he have to make her work for answers? Okay, she sighed. What if Ava is just using your best gifts? Not sure if I should be insulted? Gray looked at her even more like a confused puppy dog. Are you saying my best gift is babysitting? Devon slapped a hand over his mouth, muting his laughter. If he understood her line of questioning, he could offer help. Sniggering certainly wasn't doing anyone any good. Sage took another chug of her drink and tried to streamline the chaos of her mind to deliver her point clearly. What have you done since meeting me? Traded secrets with vampires, shades, elementals, and ethereals, right? You've gathered information on the weapon that everyone is searching for, right? And all this time, you've worked pretty independently from the standard operating procedures of A.S.S.E.T. right? A glimmer of understanding flickered to life in Gray's eyes. You think she's armchair quarterbacking me? I think you're her best agent right now. You're abrasive. You're rude. You don't seem to care for rules. Careful now, Gray warned. I did just save your newbie ass. Let her finish. I'd like to see how many ways she can insult you before you blow your top. Devin didn't bother hiding his amusement. He wiped away the tears from his eyes as he snorted. What I mean is, Sage continued, you're the best kind of undercover agent, the disillusioned cast-off. Gray's brow furrowed even deeper now. You're not saying I'm... Much as I'd like to hate you and distrust you and punch you in your arrogant face, you've always had my back, and I hope I'm not wrong in saying that I trust you to do what's right. Ava trusts you as well to make your reports on everything you've seen as my babysitter. Oh, now you think you're the chosen one? It was Gray's turn to laugh. I was close to Mark. Mark was close to Miranda. My mother, one of the last people to have been with the weapon before it went missing. That should have been obvious, but it wasn't until she said the last word that everyone in the room finally got the point. She thanked the gods for that. Trying to get them to follow her train of thought had given her a massive headache. But you don't know anything about the seed, do you? Devin asked, but the look he gave her begged Sage to say no. How could you? I don't, Sage lied quickly. But Ava doesn't know that. She probably wouldn't trust me to answer her honestly if she asked either. Trust is earned. So she's using me to get you to open up and reveal your secrets and connections? It's a possibility, Sage shrugged. My question, though, is do you trust her? Both men looked at each other silently. Neither one appeared willing to offer judgment. That didn't bode well. They had more experience with Ava, years more. Sage had been rubbed the wrong way by her from the moment she'd met Ava, but first impressions were not always accurate. Ava could very well have been cracking under the stress of upper management. That upper management put on her to find the missing weapon. Or she could have been the one to order its use, and now that it had been lost in the scuffle, she was worried for her own safety. There's one way to find out for certain, Devin offered. We feed her information and see what she does with it. And that is the end of chapter 29. So, since we're getting really, really close to the end now, I want to know who you guys think is the villain. I know Joe out there has his suspects, but how about the rest of you? Anybody have any guesses? Let's see what's going on in the comment section today. Another couple chapters and I'll be proven right. All right, we'll see. We'll see. This was a very telling chapter here. Hey, welcome back. I'm so glad to see you again this week. Yay. Anybody else making the electronic beat noise out loud is key. There you go. Yeah, we need some background noise here. Oh, go eat your hat, Gray. Yes. Yep. Ever snarky. Ever snarky. Let's see. I get the feeling a chapter like this is really giving us more setting for future books, and this is not the first or only time they will visit the club in the series. Yep. I have a feeling Blondie's about to get thrown. Yeah. I'm guessing you liked the somewhat fight scene. The problem with writing from third-person perspective, especially being close to Sage rather than doing an omniscient view, is I have to only go with what Sage can see. And because obviously Little Miss Newbie cannot be overpowered and cannot take on 3 vampires at once, she had to fail this fight. And in her failing, she can only reveal what she sees. So a lot of the fighting that went on around her, she wasn't able to see because she was so focused on not dying under the weight of Mr. Snaggletooth. So I love being able to do fight scenes, and Sage does have plenty of actual fight scenes, but this one had to be kind of an almost fade to black because from the perspective that we're writing this one from, she can't see it, so she can't explain it. Go Devin, take care of your girl. Devin's good. And yeah, coconut water is horrible. Horrible. However, It is the best damn hangover cure if you're ever looking for one. 2 Motrins and a bottle of coconut water. Ugh. Oh, it's terrible, but it works. Definitely works. You can see the smile on my face as you read tattoo. Okay, well then let's look at how many people in the book have tattoos. Because there's more than one. Well, hey, Sue, thank you. Not yet, no guesses yet. I wanted this one to be a surprise. So when I did the beta reads on this one before it went to my editor, every time I sent a section to my beta readers, I asked them, okay, now who do you think the villain is? And if anybody got too close to it, I would go back and I would add in some stuff to kind of blur the lines a little bit. Because I don't want it to be a bad surprise at the end. I don't want it to be like one of those you never see the character and all of a sudden they're the bad guy. But I wanted it to be a really eye-opening surprise so that it kind of made it, make you really go back and look and say, wow, I guess the clues were there, but not what I expected, but in a good way. So we are getting closer. We are getting so close to the end now. In fact, we are like just a couple chapters away. In fact, we may finish that this year. Depends if I can get some extra reading time in. We may be able to finish this book in one more session. We'll see. All right. Let's see if anybody else has put their guess in. Keep trying and deflecting the truth. The truth will set me free. Joe thinks he knows. Joe thinks he knows. Horrible trying to figure out who the bad guy is. Hey, that's not a bad thing. That's not, because as long as it's not completely obvious through the whole book, then it becomes a good surprise. But if you know from like chapter 2 or 3, oh, this is the villain, then there's no more mystery to it. So right now the mystery is who's playing all of them, who is masterminding this game and setting all the pieces against one another. So hopefully we'll be able to finish this one before the end of the year. I'm going to try and fit it all in on the next read. And then once we're done with this book series, I'm going to put up a poll and see if you guys want me to continue by reading book 2, or if you guys would like me to start from one of my other series, because I do have 6 book series. So we will put that poll up after I'm done reading the last couple chapters in this one, which hopefully will be next Sunday. So until then, guys, happy holidays. Enjoy this week. Do some fun stuff for yourself and spend some time with your family. That's what the holidays are all about. I love you guys, and I will see you next read for the finale.